All right, Mark chapter 10 is where we find ourselves. Let's begin by reading, beginning in verse 46. Mark 10, begin reading in verse 46. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, the son of David, have mercy on me. Many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up, he's calling you. Throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, go your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Father, I pray that over these next moments, children who are taking notes, drawing pictures of blind Bartimaeus, to teenagers, to young adults, all the way in between, all the way up to retirees. The Spirit of God would do a deep work in our heart through the word before us. And I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Her name is Monica. She's the mother of a guy that you may have heard about. His name is Augustine or Augustine or maybe Saint Augustine. Augustine was one of the influential church fathers in northern Africa. And now before Augustine was ever called the Bishop of Hippo, he was known by another title, the blasphemer of all things holy. He was a wicked man. He was an immoral man. And Monica, his mom, spent years weeping and praying. Years does not describe it. It's actually decades. Praying for her immoral, blaspheming son. And like the crowd in Mark chapter 10, even a bishop grew impatient with this mother because she would come to this bishop and ask him to pray with her for her wayward son. In fact, one day he grew so impatient that he hushed Monica, sent her, told her to leave him alone. But as she walked away, he added this promise to her. He said this, there's no way the son of so many tears could be lost. And so she kept crying out. And at the age of 32, Augustine was born again because of the merciful prayer, the merciful response from God. And in our text this morning, I want you to see three ways mercy changes everything. And the very first thing I want you to see this morning is the cry that cannot be silenced, which is also the title of our sermon this morning. First century beggars had no way to work. There's no occupation, there's no kind of a therapy to provide ways for them to educate them into a job. And so they sat at busy intersections begging for their daily food. And Bartimaeus' voice had become as common as the Jericho dust. You could hear dogs yelping. You could hear the pum, pum, pum of hammers hammering away. You could hear carts squeaking through the streets. You could hear the noise of children playing and mothers yelling. And oh, by the way, you could also hear the voice of blind Bartimaeus begging for alms for the poor. But on this day, though blind, Bartimaeus had other senses, and he could sense that the city was in an uproar, was something, there was a spirit of anticipation, there was a spirit of excitement, and so he began asking those around him, what's going on today? Because his voice constantly receded into the background, they continued to ignore him. And finally, he pulled at some robes of some men here and there, and he said, what's going on? Someone finally explained to him, the rabbi from Nazareth, the healing rabbi from Nazareth, is leaving Jericho today. Healing, he thought. This was his chance. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Now, Matthew records that there are 2 beggars at the gate. So does Luke. Mark only names the louder of the 2, Bartimaeus. And so, amplifying his voice and desperation, he cries out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And immediately he is shushed in Hebrew and in Greek and any other language that was there in the city of Jericho that day. And the more they told him to be quiet, the louder he got. Bartimaeus' cry for healing grew from a cry for mercy. You know what a cry for mercy is? A cry for mercy is a vocalization of desperation. It is a confession of helplessness, and it is an invitation for divine intervention. And we know that this is a plea for divine intervention because of the messianic title that he uses. He says, Son of David. He's pulling back from the knowledge that he has of his Old Testament scriptures. In fact, this is the 3rd time in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus' messianic identity is revealed. It happened first in Mark chapter 1 when the demon says, I know who you are. You are the Son of God. And what did Jesus do? Jesus said, now is not my time to be fully known. Be quiet, demon. It happens again in Mark chapter 8 where Peter says, I know who you are. You are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus responds, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And now, this 3rd time, this physically blind man has the ability to spiritually see. Friend, the need for mercy will either paralyze you, it will plunge you into hopelessness, or it will drive you to cry out. I ask you this question this morning, where are you? Are you sitting paralyzed in the corner? Have you been put into kind of a pit or plunged into hopelessness? I want you to know this morning that the despair you feel is actually an attempt by the God of heaven to get you to cry out for mercy. You see, when mercy is needed, self-awareness gets thrown to a dusty curb in Jericho. When mercy is needed, people tell you to be quiet, but desperation ignores the crowd. A cry of mercy and for mercy cannot and will not be silenced by anyone. So, let the crowds of this world attempt to silence you. Let the crowds of this world tell you that Jesus isn't powerful enough to rescue you. And even though the crowds in your heart or in your mind question whether or not the Jesus of the Bible of Bartimaeus can extend mercy to you, let your voice not be silenced in your cry of mercy from Jesus to you. And I want you to know this, it is worth it to cry out. It is worth it to cry out because Jesus will stop. He will stop, he will hear, and he will invite you to himself. That is this cry that we are being invited to join in Bartimaeus. We're being invited to join a choir of singers, and all we sing over and over again is, we need mercy. This cry does not stay in the auditorium, but is intended for us to go out Monday through Saturday and for us to cry out, Son of David, have mercy upon me. To Cry out for mercy on a Monday is to admit that I can't live my life apart from Jesus. And so we cry out for daily divine intervention. And Mark says this as he's writing. He says Jesus stopped and said, call him. And they called the blind man. The text says, take heart, get up, he's calling you. If you have the NIV translation in front of you, I love how it translates it. It says, cheer up. He's calling you, man. It doesn't add the man part. And the garment that was used to collect the money, it says that his cloak, he cast it aside. That's not his outer coat like when he gets cold at night. That's actually the cloak that was used when he was begging for money, and he would keep it there. And so when Jesus says, hey, come on, he throws that and presumably all the money that was in there with it and saying, my mercy has been found. So he jumps up, goes to Jesus. And I want you to see the second way that mercy changes everything, and it is this, that there is an invitation that stops everything. You can see in your mind's eye, can you not, as Jesus and his merry band of 12 disciples and the crowd are exiting, and there's a cloud of dust that is above their heads, and all of a sudden Jesus stops. And as he stops, his disciples stop. And like an accordion kind of being closed, the people bump into one another. They're like, what is going on? And so they say, Jesus stopped. Why did he stop? He stopped for one man. What? Who? You know the blind guy that won't stop yelling? Him. What? Jesus stopped for the one. This morning, I want you to hear this. Jesus isn't just listening to the Christian's voice that calls out for mercy. Friend, Jesus hears your voice too. He hears the voice of someone who is desperately wanting to believe that everything about Jesus is true, but you're not quite there yet. He hears your voice. In fact, I would say that's why he brought you in this morning, as a divine act of mercy. And today, Jesus' invitation isn't just to the Christian, but he's saying to you too, sir. He's saying to you too, ma'am, what do you want me to do for you? And friend, this is not some kind of like Jesus being the divine genie in the lamp that he just kind of rub it and poof, he comes out and says, what do you want me to do for you? That's not this type of request. What the request is for this man to repeat the mercy that he needed in his life. What Jesus wants to know is, will you and I respond with, I need saving mercy. I need sin-forgiving mercy. I need eternity-securing mercy. I need Jesus is my King mercy. Did you know that when Jesus asked that question, what do you want me to do for you? Do you know that's the second time he's asked this question in this chapter? That we're actually supposed to understand that when he asked it one way 15 verses earlier, and then he asked it here, how they responded in both times. There's a negative illustration and a positive illustration. Bartimaeus is the positive illustration. Let me show you the negative illustration. So turn back to verse 35. Mark 10, verse 35, and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And Jesus said to them, what do you want me to do for you? And what did James and John want Jesus to do? We want a seat, one on the right and one on the left. We want a seat of power. We want to rule. And if you ever happen to abdicate the seat, then that means we're in charge. James and John want a seat of power on either side of Jesus. What does Bartimaeus want? He wants mercy. Perhaps when you first heard me read that question, what do you want me to do for you? All of a sudden, your mind came up with 1,000 things. I want to win the lottery. I want my kids to behave. Where Jesus is taking us is this: do you want mercy? That's what he wants you to respond with. Now you may be thinking, but Pastor, I know that Bartimaeus wants more than mercy, because he even says, I want you to heal me from my blindness. I want to suggest to you that Bartimaeus wants more than healing, and I think I can prove that from the text, that he wants more than just physical sight. And I want to give you 2 reasons why we know that Bartimaeus is asking for more than just physical healing. Here's the very first reason is this storyline of the Gospel of Mark. Or, to say it in a way that your English teacher would be pretty proud of you, the literary structure of the book of Mark. The book of Mark can be divided 3 ways. You can have Mark chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 21. And then you have chapter 8, verse 22 through the end of chapter 10, which is where we are today. And then chapter 11 through chapter 16 is as they journey into Jerusalem, leading to the crucifixion. But the reason why I think that there's something going on here besides just physical eyesight is because Mark 8:22, the second section, starts with Jesus healing a blind man. And how does Mark chapter 10 end? Healing a blind man. So I want to show you why I think that this is more than just divine healing. So you're in Mark 10, turn to Mark chapter 8, and I want you to look at verse 21, which is kind of the last verse of that first section. Mark chapter 8, verse 21, Jesus says to the disciples who are there with him, and he said to them, do you not yet understand? Specifically, what he's talking about is the divine miracles of the feeding of the 5,000 found in verse 19. But if you want to understand the structure, the literary structure of the Gospel of Mark, really what Jesus is getting at is, oh, you don't understand? Okay, Mark is going to say, I'm going to show you what it means to understand who Jesus is. And so I'm going to start with a healing of the blind. I'm going to end the story with end the section with the healing of the blind. And then we're going to walk into Jerusalem together, leading us to the cross. So the book of Mark has divided those 3 ways. And it begins, that second section begins with a greater explanation, developing the central idea. Folks, what is the central idea of the Gospel of Mark? It's found in chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 21 is the fuller explanation of what? In the beginning, the gospel of Jesus. Chapter 8, verse 22 through chapter 10 is a greater explanation, not just of the gospel of Jesus, but that he is the Christ, the Son of David, the promised one. And chapters 11 through the end is the fuller explanation that he is handsome to redeem. That Bartimaeus is asking for more context of the story that Mark places us in. And there's second reason. Because of how Jesus so you're in chapter Bartimaeus. Look at verse 52. So Bartimaeus says, Rabboni. It's the superlative there. He said, let me recover my sight. And Jesus says to him, go your way. Your faith has made you, what's the next word? Your faith has made you what? Well, there is a word underlying that could be used for physical healing. That's not the word that's used there. Do you know what word is used there? Your faith has saved you. It's the word for salvation. So did Jesus heal him physically? Yes, he did. But he healed him spiritually. So Bartimaeus isn't just given physical sight, but he's given spiritual sight too. And what is happening here is Jesus is fulfilling that promise given by the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 35, which is why Tiffany read to us Isaiah 35. I'm going to read a portion of it. It's going to be on the screen behind you. Isaiah says this: "The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus." Now listen, some of you have been to West Texas. I've been to Lubbock. I don't know if you know anything about West Texas. It is as dry as can possibly be, right? If you went out to West Texas and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, the desert is blooming like a crocus flower. That would be impressive. But what if something else happened? Look at verse 2. "The desert shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing." What if the glory of Lebanon should be given to it? What is the glory of Lebanon? It's the cedar trees, right? Because Solomon asked King Hiram when he's building the temple, "Hey, I need some of those massive cedar trees to build this temple." So Isaiah is saying, listen, a time is coming when the glory, the desert of life is your experience. Maybe the mercy that you're calling out for isn't that God would maybe the mercy you need isn't that God would remove you from that situation, but that God would sustain you in the circumstance. Long day with the kids and massive argument with your spouse. A cry for mercy would sound like this: "God, help me to be humble towards my spouse, of towards my children," like that. Or maybe that's not the prayer of mercy that you need. Maybe the prayer of mercy is, you know that the scriptures are teaching that God is the one who rules and he reigns and he's over every detail of our lives. And yet God's sovereignty is not a warm blanket that comforts. It seems to be a nightmare in your life. And so your cry for mercy is, "God, I want to see the beauty of your sovereignty as something that actually is endearing and that you really are in control of my life. Show mercy to me." Maybe this stage that God you find yourself in, you're in a state of singleness and you feel lonely right now. Maybe your cry for mercy is, "God, would you place someone that I could just be have a deep friendship with?" But Lord, until that time comes, I know your word says that Jesus sticks closer than a brother. So would you make your presence so real in my life? That's the mercy that I need. Do you see how this cry for mercy isn't just some kind of theological axiom? "Oh, he's the Son of David, have mercy on me." But this has real meaning to our lives today. Dear Christian, though your mind and heart may tell you to sit back and be quiet, to make deserts bloom, deaf to hear, blind to see, in the throngs of people, Jesus hears your, or perhaps you quietly does the cry, "I want life muffled." Well, how does Bartimaeus respond? Look at verse 52. "And Jesus said to him, 'Go your way, your faith has saved you.' And immediately Bartimaeus recovered his sight." But that's not what Mark wants you to concentrate on. Mark wants you to concentrate on the final 6 words. "And followed him on the way." Here's the final way that mercy changes everything. It is the sight that leads to worship. Bartimaeus is given spiritual eyes to see and know Jesus. Bartimaeus recovers his sight and he follows Jesus on the way. On the way to where? This is not a simple recounting that Bartimaeus followed him on the way out of Jericho so that he could finally do some sightseeing. I always wanted to see the temple there in Jerusalem. Now I get my chance. I'm going to join the merry band and head on the way. That's not what this is. No, Bartimaeus is following Jesus on the way to the cross. How do you know that, Pastor? Verse 1. And Bartimaeus is named while in this gospel that Bartimaeus is still very much active and perhaps even an influential Christian in the early church there in Rome. And so when they're reading this, they're like, oh, I know Bart. He read the scriptures last Sunday in our Lord's Day gathering. But actually, you were dead in your trespasses and sins, but you were resurrected to a new life. How were you resurrected to a new life? By divine mercy of Jesus. And a person who encounters saving mercy is a person that worships by following Jesus in the way. Perhaps you come to church regularly and you're always kind of befuddled. Why do they seem to be so? Augustine's mother's request to the bishop was silenced. Thankfully, there was a God who stopped to listen to those tearful prayers. Augustine, in his biography, would later describe his own conversion this way as, quote, as divine mercy dispelling the darkness of uncertainty in my heart. Let me put it in Bartimaeus' language. Bartimaeus would say to Augustine, he made you to see, brother. He made you to hear, friend. He made you to worship. And Bartimaeus' prayer, saints, does not stop on that Jericho and roadside. It is a prayer that you and I are to pray daily. That is, while we worship Jesus on Sundays, we follow Jesus through the valleys and on the mountaintops Monday through Saturday. And am I the only Christian that needs to confess this? Is there ever a time where you are bored by mercy? When our hearts are bored by mercy, we ask God, here's what it means. When your heart is bored, Jesus, thank you. I don't know. Durham, get the drums up there next time. Make it a little bit more exciting for me. Oh, no, 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 no. When your heart is bored with mercy, what you cry out again is, Son of David, have mercy on me. And when our hearts are cold to mercy, Christians' hearts can be cold to mercy. It's why, perhaps, maybe you sat out of following Jesus on the Lord's Day for 3 or 4 years. All of a sudden, you're back in because your heart got cold to mercy. So what do? You pray that God's mercy would renew our minds and renew our spirits. But what, folks, when our hearts are enthralled with mercy, we tell others. We pray for others. When our hearts are quieted by mercy, we sing softly, we sing loudly, we sing. The invitation this morning is twofold. For those who have experienced salvific divine mercy, you've been saved, to use Jesus' language, like Bartimaeus, like Augustine. The invitation is this: will you continue to follow Jesus in the way? The second invitation is to those of you who have yet to experience this divine mercy, this saving mercy. In just a moment, you're like, but Pastor Joel, I'm not quite sure how I would. The room where it's quiet. And they'll show you Jesus. You who might be able to